Today on Restricted Handling.
Armenia and Iran, a lot of people paint them as like brother countries or super close. Armenia knows exactly the beast that exists under it. They're very aware. It's a mixed relationship with very mixed sentiments.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Restricted Handling podcast. Glenn is out doing God's work in Eastern Europe right now, so you're stuck with just me, but we do have Sarkis back on. Fortunately, been on 5 months ago, and a ton has happened in Armenia. We're going to talk Armenia, Russia, the region, probably a little Iran, of course. But just to recap a few of the things that happened. Pashinyan survived a pro-Russian electoral challenge with what we believe to be alleged Russian interference, which is no surprise. They had a sweeping partnership signed with Washington. They agreed to the U.S.-controlled TRIPP company. But Armenia still does get a lot of its gas from Russia, hosts a Russian military base. There aren't any American security guarantees written in stone into these agreements necessarily, and it still sits in a very contentious region separated by Georgia to Russia, and then borders Turkey, Iran, Azerbaijan. Not the easiest neighborhood to live in these days. But we're so glad to have you back, Sarkis. I know you've been traveling in the region. I would love to get your take of what it was like. Did change feel like it was in the air at all? Could you feel this excitement or all the activity when you were there?
Yeah. I would say the general sentiment and like aura, if you will, in the air is that Armenians have some stability for the next 6 years. Not only politically, but for the first time like ever in the country's history, within the past year, there's been no like cross-border incidents or soldiers killed from non-friendly fire. So that's a big step, and that's something that is absolutely felt by people. There's still a little bit, depending who you ask, of mixed sentiments on the Pashinyan regime. But what I am sensing is that people didn't vote for Pashinyan because they love him. They voted for him because he was the only option in a suite of ranging from ridiculous, because you had Spider-Man running this election. If you were paying attention to it, it's very funny.
Is that right?
Yeah. Dem Em Im Bolorin was the name of the party. And so you can look it up. It's quite funny. But which means I am against everyone. But then there's the other side of the scale, which was like the strongest contenders for the election were former presidents Sarkisian and Robert Kocharyan running, who were absolutely backed by Russia. And Gagik Tsarukyan. These three, they had a lot of investments in the country where a lot of people's jobs depended on it. And from friends in the region and friends in the country, a lot of them were saying their friends and family were voting for those people because their jobs depended on it. So people were voting, when they voted for Pashinyan, they were voting for continued progress and future trajectory away from the brutal post-Soviet past.
I hope it pissed Putin off so much. I loved seeing this happen. Like the last 5 months, I think have been great, and a great signal for other countries in the region that want a little more autonomy away from Russia, I would say.
I'd absolutely agree. I would say that you can see this in the posture and events surrounding the EAEU conversation, which is the Eurasian Economic Union. It's basically that region's Russian-founded EU. So in the past 6 months, you've seen the EAEU summit demand, prior to the election, they demand the Pashinyan regime hold a referendum on the EU, and they're trying to force, I'd say, some political action ahead of the election for their own purposes and stirring the pot. What's interesting is since this conversation has it's definitely escalated. Armenian exports to Russia have been banned in different ways, everything ranging from Armenia's delicious sparkling water called Jermuk to dairy products, to alcohol, to honey being not sanitary or good enough to Russian standards. And they've been doing this because Russia knows that it's 35% of Armenia's export volume. And so they're doing this to hurt Armenia while Armenia is simultaneously pursuing cessation or
Ascension, yeah.
Ascension, thank you.
Yeah.
So they're looking to access the EU market, but they're not looking to end the EAEU agreement. So Russia's made it very clear that Armenia has to choose one or the other.
And I feel like they successfully removed themselves, Armenia, from Russia's orbit a bit. Now, they didn't get a security guarantee, right? So if we talk about the comprehensive strategic partnership, what do you assess that Armenia got out of that?
Yeah. When you look at the tenets, like the core tenets of the Armenia-U.S. strategic partnership, you can find a lot of information about all of the core tenets except the security cooperation part, which is very interesting. I would say that Armenia is focused on developing its own sovereign capabilities to defend and maintain its national security. That's like the whole vision that I've gotten from government and society alike, because the former national security apparatus was Russia. You could find Russian border security, Russian bases, Russian TSA at their airport, pretty much the internal security service called the NSS. All of their agents trained in Moscow, many are likely on or were likely on Russian payroll. And now you're finally seeing the flowers bud and start to bloom. You're seeing a complete change in Armenia's military leadership, the way it's structured. I've run into literally on the road to Lake Sevan, I ran into a American service member who was there training, and he was like in complete happenstance. I saw this guy while I was grabbing a parashki at a roadside like rest stop, and I said, "So, you from Kansas or somewhere else?" And he's like, "You're American?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm American." And we started talking, and he told me, he's like, "Yeah, we're really excited because we just inducted our first set of officers that we trained in this non-commissioned officer style." And then also Armenia is developing its own defense industrial base. There are companies that are creating different types of C2 systems, drone systems like everyone else is.
Yeah.
And then also AI, I would put into the like umbrella of sensitive objects. I don't think, well, I know that this data center specifically, it brings security to Armenia because it's such a strategically valuable object.
Sarkis, can you talk about the data center just for people?
Yeah. What guarantees Armenia's security right now is the Armenian Sovereign Republic of Armenia. They're trying to take it on as much as they can with support from Western partners that I've mentioned. On top of that, you have strategic investments that come with Western interest. So one of those strategic investments that has gone into Armenia is the Firebird data center, or more accurately described as a AI factory. And so I was at the grand opening for this a few weeks ago, and Jensen Huang made a statement. One of the President Trump's administration leaders on this project was also there, or digitally giving comments. But then you had the Deputy Prime Minister of Kazakhstan speaking, as well as the other founders of Firebird and Armenian government officials officially present. This data center is a $4 billion project. $500 million of capital is already invested, and it is meant to be linked to another data center, also a Firebird data center in Kazakhstan. And to create this regional AI, I would call it AI gravity, because all these other countries around, if they want compute to be able to build their own AI applications or run on AI, they're going to have to approach these two countries for compute. And there's going to be a fiber optic cable connecting the two via the Caspian Sea, projected by end of 2026. I tell people, Armenians, Americans alike, this is for the region the most strategically valuable object that exists. Like, I would argue over a nuclear plant, but the nuclear plant is symbiotic with it because they need that. And that's also coming via a U.S. agreement. I forget what date, but within the past 6 months, you also saw Vice President Vance visit Armenia, and he confirmed the ongoing process of the 123 agreement, nuclear agreement, which is in process for small modular reactors to be sold to Armenia and maintained. And that's a $5 billion plus $4 billion deal as well. So billions are flying. The money machine is going burr. And so these are the pieces of critical infrastructure, I would say, are guaranteeing Armenia's security. And then another thing too is American attention via these items, but also in general. This peace project is Trump's baby, and one of the babies he has. And he wants to be known as the president of peace. And so I think what guarantees Armenia peace in the next 5 to 10 years is not only these investments, but also in the immediate term, the interest that this administration has in locking down the TRIPP corridor, or TRIPP route, as some people prefer to call it.
For people who aren't familiar with what TRIPP is, right? So this is effectively like an infrastructure logistical corridor that runs from Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Nakhchivan, yeah.
Nakhchivan, through Armenia. And so it ties the countries together, but it's also got Trump's name as the T in TRIPP, right? So it very much is anchoring the U.S. into this arrangement between two neighbors that have had contentious history. So that's great. This company set up, so 74% American owned, the remainder is Armenian owned, 49-year arrangement between the two countries. Do you get the feeling 74% US, the remainder Armenian? Are there hard feelings there? Or is this feels like a good thing in Armenia on the ground?
I haven't heard much negative sentiment on the TRIPP route. I think from everything I've heard Armenians talk about, they welcome the stability. Like Armenia as a country that's had zero stability since it became independent in 1991. So like from what I hear, there's a general positive, if at worst, neutral sentiment towards it. The 74% American ownership. So there's a caveat. If you look at the State Department's write-up on this, it's for 49 years. And then if Armenia decides to continue the lease for another 49 years, they get 49% ownership of it. So America, or the United States of America, holds, like, even in the long term, technically a majority stake. And I think you're right that it does create US interest in the region so that bad actors around know that if they mess with this thing, then they're going to get in trouble or they're going to have problems with not only Armenia, but the United States. So I think it's a long-term strategic play, and it's not the only one. Yeah. And President Trump's spokesman for it that I mentioned previously, he mentioned that this is just the first. Like, the vision is to fund and be involved with Armenia's infrastructure build-out of connecting the region and making money off this. And that is a reflection of Trump's foreign policy philosophy, which is the U.S. should not be giving out aid. It should be giving out investment, and you do business diplomacy. Business-based diplomacy. I personally, in my opinion, and I could be totally wrong, I think it's working. Yeah. And so the TRIPP, or AKA the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, it's not only this segment of the Armenia, which is, if you look at a map, and if you can display a map on screen here,
I'll have it on screen. Yep.
You can see it's a very small piece of land. It's the lower part of Armenia, and it stretches between Azerbaijan through Armenia to this little blob which is Azerbaijan's exclave, called Nakhichevan. And so the vision is to create interconnectivity between Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and the broader Caspian region. Because right now, as we speak, Turkey and Azerbaijan have closed borders with Armenia, and they've yet to open them. But there's been a lot of signals in the past 6 months that I would say are technically tangible. I'm still very pessimistic on if they'll happen, but they are tangible. And both Turkey and Azerbaijan have commissioned the reconstruction of railroads to the borders of that area where the TRIPP route is going to be created. So when money and infrastructure are being built out and construction is actually happening, I'd have to do some like geospatial analysis to see if it's actually happening right now. But in terms of news, that's what's been reported. I can't confirm it. So if that's happening, it's a good indicator that something will change, hopefully. But I'm a little pessimistic on this because they may want to only trade with each other or not allow Armenia to participate in this vision. I expect issues for Armenia with this, or bumps along the road. But I think overall it will create the interconnectivity and stability that people need.
Yeah. And I'm going to use this opportunity just to mention something that I had asked Glenn about in the neighborhood, right? So you mentioned Turkey. Just a few days ago, Israel struck a Syrian base, right, which is not so far from Armenia, that had some Turkish military officials there a few hours prior. And I was just curious and asked Glenn, because he's worked Turkey in the region quite a bit, thoughts on this. So just to level set with people, Israel launched 8 strikes on Syria's Abu al-Dahur air base, hitting runways, hangars. A Turkish delegation had reportedly inspected the base hours earlier and then left. And Israel said it was preventing a Turkish deployment, which Ankara and Damascus are denying. Now, I asked Glenn for his take. And so for people who listen to this regularly, since we don't have Glenn on, Glenn mentioned several possibilities, right? So one is Israelis had information, maybe there were jihadists there. As al-Shara has been president, he's been trying to rein in the terrorist and extremist sides of Syria. There's a potential there, but I do think Israel would have mentioned that publicly if that's what they were doing, because this created a bit of a rub with Turkey, obviously. But it's also possible Israel's sending a message to Erdogan and al-Shara that they're not going to tolerate Turks getting in too deep in Syria. But it's also possible that the Israelis are trying to create friction between Erdogan and Trump in Syria, with the concern that Erdogan's got a little bit too much attention with Trump right now, And the Turks are getting a lot of things from the White House. One that Glenn had mentioned, a possible return of the F-35 program. Glenn said he's noticed an uptick in anti-Turkish lobbying in the U.S. and media space. And just because this is in the region, it touches on Iran and Syria and all these things, I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've heard a lot of people in the past say like the next Middle East conflict is going to be between Israel and Turkey.
Gosh,
But
no, thanks.
I don't know. I don't think, this is my main thought that came to mind as you were saying all this. If Turkey really wanted to stand on its business with regard to Gaza, Palestinians, and Israel, okay, and if it really wanted to punish Israel, it would shut down all of the exports of energy from the Ceyhan port, or Ceyhan or Ceyhan, however you say it, because Israel receives over 50% of all of its energy from Baku to Tbilisi to Ceyhan port. So Azerbaijan is one of those main energy providers. And you'll always notice that Azerbaijan is noticeably quiet on anything regarding Israel because they are one of their biggest clients. So if Turkey really wanted to put pain on Israel, they would do that. So I think there's a lot of political optics here with Syria. In regard to Syria, Turks have been there like for years working with different Western forces. That's not new.
All right, I'm going to pivot now back to Armenia and specifically Russia. Right, so I am very happy to see that Russia was frustrated by the election outcome. I'm sure they're not happy about TRIPP. They're not happy about the strategic partnership. What are 4 ways Putin could retaliate, you think, that would matter for Armenia?
So there's energy, there's exports, and you've already seen it in the past 6 months, okay? And you've seen it in longer than the past 6 months. If Russia wanted to, it could get, it has the same energy relationship with Armenia, actually, that Israel and Azerbaijan have, weirdly. So Russia provides a lot of light natural gas to Armenia and other energy products. So Armenia is pretty dependent on that. I think they've been trying to reduce that dependency via renewables and nuclear, and also via Azerbaijan. So there are gas stations in Armenia that are Shell or Azerbaijani gas. So you can have feelings and opinions on that, but that's just the reality. So Armenia is doing everything it can to diversify its energy as well. But Russia, for now and for the time being, absolutely can pull that lever, and they have in the past. The other lever they could pull and have pulled in the past 6 months, we've seen it, is by saying we're banning your exports to us. We're not going to take your consumer products like fish, like alcohol. And actually, I know personally people who are raising fish in Armenia and produce alcohol at some of the cognac factories. And what's interesting is these things happen prior to the election and a little bit post, but it happened prior to the election. And these people, because they depend on this for their livelihood, ended up voting for the opposition. And so it was pretty clear political calculus or political intervention calculus. And so that's the second way. You could also argue, and you can argue this for any country that's involved in the region, that Russia is continually trying to, do intelligence collection in Armenia via digital means, via personnel means, like human, etc. So they can always pull that lever. And then also, I know this through personal sources, that the prime minister's life has been threatened multiple times via poisoning. That's the case I know of. And the prime minister is very paranoid because of that. And I don't think Azerbaijan would want to do that because the prime minister right now is the best one they could get or work with rather. And Turkey seems to like him. I don't know about Iran. We can talk about that as well. And Georgia has no problem with the prime minister. And so you can do a little bit of deduction there. So those are the levers that they've pulled tangibly in the last 6 months.
And some of the security partnership language was around cyber defense, counter-influence campaign, foreign military sales. So there's a lot, the U.S. Armenia kind of relationship that helps them as well. And Russia's preoccupied, right? I mean, they got a ton going on already, and they probably don't want to cut off any revenue stream that they could be getting in terms of natural gas or whatever going to Armenia. So interesting.
For now.
Let's talk Iran. You mentioned that. Is there a way Armenia can deepen this relationship with Washington while still being close with Tehran? It's got to be so hard right now.
I want to be very clear on something. Again, my personal perspective, what I've heard, what I've seen, what I've read, and what I've developed myself. Armenia and Iran, a lot of people paint them as brother countries or super close. Armenia knows exactly the beast that exists under it. They're very aware of that component. it's a mixed relationship with very mixed sentiments. They operate with them because they know they're the only player in the region that enabled them to have outward trade. And frankly, the Georgians for a while, or the Georgian regimes, have had a monopoly on trade. They've known that for a while, and so they charge Armenia up the wazoo to have port access. And so they're just the only two options. I would say for the Iran-Armenia relationship, the last delegation that I brought in March was when the war started between Iran and everyone else. Armenia was the only country in the region that did not see any type of issues. And when I was on the ground there every day with these students from universities in DC, I was like on the edge of my seat while we're traveling down south to see different sites, because I'm like, God, please don't let there be any type of strike with my group. I want them to have a good impression here. But when we met with the foreign ministry, their commentary was very interesting. They said that Iran has told us that we are their corridor or bridge of peace to the outside world, that we will be unharmed. And they held to that. And so Iran needs Armenia because it is that neutral player. And I think that there are elements within the Iranian regime that have had enough of the conflict, and that they need to cut a deal with the West in general to function as a state. They also, but you could debate on the outcomes of the most recent war, etc. But I think they understand that long term they can't sustain this. No one can. But I don't think Armenia is concerned with picking a side, because the U.S. has made it clear to Armenia that it understands where it's at, and Iran has made it clear to Armenia that it understands where it's at. And you see this in a recent visit of, I think it was President Pashinyan or one of the foreign ministers. They came to Armenia recently and spoke with Pashinyan and basically reiterated that the United States will not be performing any activity that would be adversarial to Iran via this TRIPP route. And you've seen the alarm from Iran calm down since then. So I think as long as they have that guarantee, and again, it's a 27-mile long route. If something were going down there, you would notice. So I think that they have the signal that the U.S. isn't going to be doing anything crazy there or threatening Iran in any way there. And so I think that fire's been extinguished. But yeah,
I'm sure for many diplomats, the Iran conflict that's been going on, all the fighting since February, March, probably worried them about TRIPP, the strategic partnership.
Another interesting thing is both France and Iran have a consulate in Syunik, the southern part of Armenia, in the city of Kapan. So, and that to me is an indicator that they have an outlet and a venue to talk.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Let's talk Pashinyan. Reelected also in the past 6 months. Wasn't a landslide, right? I think it was 49% of the vote, but enough to govern. What's your take on what his mandate is now based on this recent election?
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, Armenia in July had their election. It's a very, very contentious race with a lot of interesting characters, as I mentioned previously. So the result was that the incumbent, Pashinyan, received a vote of 49 or 50%. And so before his government had a supermajority in parliament. Now they don't. And so a few of the former oligarchs that had parliamentary immunity now don't have it. So they tried escaping. They're being prosecuted, and we'll see what this prosecution.
These are Russian oligarchs?
There are Armenian oligarchs with Gagik Sarkis. Just look him up, Gagik. And then the Sarkis is TS. He's low key my favorite oligarch, because he looks like Wreck-It Ralph. The man is insanely wealthy. He had casinos, cement factories. He had all these really successful investments. They employed thousands of people. So he employed his investments. I think employed over 10,000 people in the country. So he had nearly enough votes. It was by a few hundred votes that he didn't get parliamentary representation. So he tried escaping to Russia as soon as he realized the election didn't pan out for him. And then the Armenian border security stopped him, detained him, and then brought him back. So again, the Pashinyan government has a majority, but not a supermajority. So now they have a bit of an issue with being able to pass things in parliament. And one of those things that you asked me, what is on the agenda for the Pashinyan administration? I don't know for the long term. But in the near term, the question about the constitution is being drummed up again.
Can you explain that, Sarkis?
So currently, Armenia's constitution in its preamble has a reference to Artsakh, or the Republic of Artsakh, otherwise known as Nagorno-Karabakh. And it's a reference to that Armenian control over it.
And we've discussed this in the previous podcast if people are interested on that matter.
So in 2020, there was a war over this, a second or third war technically, that resulted in Azerbaijan taking back what was 10% of its land, internationally recognized. And so since then, Azerbaijan has been, as the victor of that war, squeezing Armenia of everything it's got in this peace determination process. One of those asks from the beginning in 2024, when the negotiations were really beginning for this peace agreement, I remember working with the Middle East Institute and interacting with State Department officials on this, and they told me Azerbaijan's squeezing Armenia of everything it's got. And it knows that the Constitution, or it's viewing the Constitution as its make or break for agreeing to this peace agreement. And so since then, it's been the contention point. And before, Pashinyan said, hey, my hands are tied. I'm a democratic leader. I can't just make a new constitution and issue it. Our parliament has to vote on it. So the Armenian parliament right now, there are members of it that want to ratify a new constitution, or I guess amend, or whatever the language is for it. So that the preamble would either be removed or the reference to Artsakh would be removed. But this is at direct ask of Azerbaijan and its dictator Ilham Aliyev. So this is the problem, is that you have a foreign power that's adversarial technically to Armenia, commanding changes to Armenia's core documents, and there's a democratic process for this. So Azerbaijan is not technically signed a peace deal with Armenia. It's signed for the framework or whatever, agreeing on a framework, but there's no peace deal signed or treaty signed. And they've expressed directly, they will not sign it until this constitution is changed. So now you're seeing the Pashinyan administration and its parliamentary representatives advocating for this. And now that they're there for 6 years, they have 6 years of time to wear down the populace and work on their parliament passing it or not. I don't know if they'll be successful or not, but I think it's a moderate likelihood that it'll happen.
Right. I'll just say I've been very impressed with Armenia, what Armenia has been able to do, given where it sits and its relationship with Russia, the U.S., Europe, and Iran, to pull off some pretty big partnerships, deals with the U.S., with all of this other stuff going on around it. Very impressive.
Yeah. It is very interesting, this inflection point happened.
I feel like it's such a good example for other smaller states on how to leverage different relationships and resources.
And I would also say a big part of this is diaspora connections too. I will say this, the current government and the general populace of diasporans do not get along. But I think there's a silent majority out there, that's at least my opinion, but there are actually very powerful Armenians in tech, in the defense sector, in the U.S. government, advisors to presidents who I can't name, who are Armenian American origin. And there is a lot of support for Armenia within the halls of power. And so I think that has been another booster to this. And then you also have to look at the receptiveness of the government of that small state, where you can have all the support you want, but if the government's not receptive, then there's not going to be progress made like you're talking about so quickly.
Sarkis, what did we miss, man? Other stuff going on in Armenia or the region that we should hit on?
Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is perhaps the thing that I have been watching very quietly develop. I don't know much about Kazakhstan. I'm not a Kazakhstan expert, but what I can tell you is that in a side conversation in an elevator with a government official in 2024, it was confided in me that Kazakhstan envied, in a positive way, envied Armenia being able to take the steps it did to remove itself from CSTO, aka Russia's NATO over the region. And it wanted the same thing because it saw the same vulnerabilities it had remaining in the CSTO. And so I'll never forget that comment that was made to me. And so since then, now you have the deputy prime minister of Kazakhstan coming to Armenia for this U.S. San Francisco based startup called Firebird, investing into a $4 billion AI project in Armenia and Kazakhstan. So two major data centers, AI factories are going to be built both in Armenia and Kazakhstan and connected with each other via fiber optic cable across the Caspian Sea. And so the theory is that these things will be so powerful and strategically important that they draw gravity to each other from the nations in the region, and that the region then has to behave. And so it's an interesting thing to look at, but if I could read a quote from the prime minister or deputy minister of Kazakhstan, he announced that the Trans-Caspian fiber is connecting Kazakhstan and Armenia, and they're going to be building this segment from Aktay to Sumgait, which is Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. And then the Armenian connection will run onward through Azerbaijani territory. And then he also mentioned the full digitalization of Kazakhstan over the next 3 years, and that they've rewritten their constitution to provide data protection for their citizens and create digital economy laws. And so Kazakhstan is trying to become a tech-focused state or tech-focused country. And this is one of their physical manifestations of that push. So I think you're going to see a lot more from Kazakhstan in the next few years that not many expected to find. Yeah. And they have the energy to feed those data centers, by the way.
Has the energy, massive country, borders Russia, China, also sits in a tough neighborhood and has to balance a lot of competing relationships. So it's a great story, especially because Azerbaijan's involved with the connectivity.
Yeah. I think too, another thing, I think when we're studying international relations, we forget the mortality of the current leaders that we stare at. And I think many of the governments in this region are waiting for the current Russian government to die out, to age out and die out, really. And I think these countries like Armenia and Kazakhstan and even Azerbaijan get it. And so I think they're kind of all waiting for Putin to pass and to see what comes after him. Because they know that if they can weather this storm, that whoever comes after Putin may be less dictatorial, maybe not, but maybe less hyper controlling or hyper paranoid of a country establishing its own boundaries. So I think that's something to really keep an eye on. And I think that's how the Armenian government is looking in its long-term vision, is we have to break off now. It'll be a cost that we have to take. But if we, Armenia is saying, if we have to submit to Russia now, it will cost us in the long term. I will make a comment on this. The new ambassador to the United States from Armenia, Narek Bakurchian, lovely guy. And I had a meeting after my last delegation I brought to Armenia. I called up the embassy, said, hey, can I do a debrief with y'all to show you what my students have learned, what my participants have learned? And he's very welcoming towards it. And in that meeting, someone asked a very good question. They said, what is your number one goal if Pashinyan was to, ask you one main thing and outcome he wants from your tenure as an ambassador? What would that be? And his response was corporate diplomacy. Mm-hmm. And you see this reflected in his actions. You can look him up, Narek Bakurchian, and see that he's been on multiple interviews in the past month, and he's been really out there speaking about the country and its direction. And then also he's been establishing a lot of technical and corporate partnerships between Armenia and the United States. I think this is a really good playbook because you look at countries like Israel, France too. They did a lot of groundwork in DC to establish corporate partnerships between the United States and their country by opening offices in their country. And so I'm seeing more of that in Armenia actually as a result.
Sarkis, thanks so much, man. This was a blast.
Of course.
Don't know how we're going to top this, what could happen in 5 more months that had as much going on as the past 5 months. But thank you so much.
Armenia will always remain an interesting place. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and being a part of the RH community. Would you like to receive the same daily intel brief that Glenn and I read? You can get it at restrictedhandling.com. We've curated what we consider to be the most relevant and reputable source.